Welcome to the family, son.
Welcome along for another Dad Quest. Please give a like and subscribe if you enjoy the video. And with that out of the way, let's get started. With the news that we'll be getting a remake, I decided to revisit a horror title that stuck with me from the first time I played it to this very day. A game that has almost universal praise for its approach towards fear and guilt. Of course, we're talking about Silent Hill 2. The year was 2001, I was splitting my time between college, riding my BMX, playing video games, and of course getting smashed with my mates and causing mischief. Honestly, I don't know how I found the time. And then one day, my big brother came home with a copy of Silent Hill 2, and to say that I was excited would be an understatement. As with most games at this period of my life, I played through Silent Hill 1 with my brother, and so we sat down to do the same on my lovely, sleek, sexy PlayStation 2. Which I'd convinced my parents that we needed because it had a DVD player, before promptly assigning it to my bedroom TV, rendering it useless to them. Sorry about that one, Mum and Dad. Now we've got a little serious message before we start. This game deals with some very dark real-world issues, so please be warned that I will be discussing themes of abuse, murder and suicide. And also, if you're struggling with your own mental health, please seek help, talk to someone. Trust me, I understand on a personal level how hard that can be, and in fact my own struggles were actually what led me to start this channel as a kind of creative therapy. So please remember the help is out there and you are definitely worth the effort. Right, so after bringing everyone down with that last message, let's get into the game. It starts with our protagonist James Sunderland looking at himself in the mirror in a rather grotty looking bathroom. He appears to be confused and it doesn't take long before we find out why. You see, James has just received a letter from his wife Mary. The only problem is that Mary's been dead for 3 years. In the letter it says that she'll be waiting in their special place, so James takes a long foggy walk towards town. Along the way he meets a woman called Angela in the graveyard. She warns James away from going to Silent Hill and tells him it's dangerous, but he doesn't seem to care. Their conversation is oddly paced and they both seem confused. This is the first of many strange interactions between James and the people he meets on this journey, but much more about that later.
Kind of hard to explain, but
Is it dangerous?
When James arrives in Silent Hill, it's seemingly a ghost town full of nothing but boarded up windows and the sounds of silence, until James sees a figure shambling through the fog in the distance. He gives chase, finding large bloodstains on the road as he goes. He follows into a fenced-off tunnel where he finds a radio which, much like the first game, is crackling with static. And this is where he has his first encounter with the horrific creatures that infest Silent Hill. After bludgeoning this twisted mess of flesh with a wooden plank, James hears what seems to be his wife's voice coming through the static on the radio. After this, he continues his exploration of the town and finds himself in the Woodside apartment building. And it's here where we meet one of the most recognisable video game monsters and arguably the most important character in this story. Of course, I'm talking about Red Pyramid Thing, or as everyone who isn't a Konami employee calls him, Pyramid Head. We also get to meet a young man called Eddie who's just puking his guts up in a really nasty looking toilet whilst claiming he's not a murderer. A small girl called Laura, who for now is nothing more than a little who steps on your hand and laughs at you. And finally, just after leaving the apartments, we meet Maria, who is a doppelganger of James's dead wife Mary. Okay, so I'm going to leave the story there as it's completely impossible to explain this game and what makes it so special without spoiling it. Okay, so let's take a minute to look at this game's presentation and its development. The game was developed by Konami's Team Silent following the financial and critical success of the first game. And the original concept for the story came from the mind of the CGI director Takeyoshi Sato, who was heavily influenced by the Russian novel Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Obviously, with this being Team Silent's second journey to the town, this game would clearly look better than the first, especially with it being on a newer generation of hardware. But they did so much more than a graphical overhaul. They managed to create one of the most interesting, beautiful and unique looking games of this generation. You can't talk about Silent Hill without talking about its fog. It's something that's synonymous with the series, but here, utilising the power of the PlayStation 2, it seems to be used more for atmosphere and less to hide boundaries due to hardware limitations. And don't get me wrong, it's probably being used that way here too, just not purely out of necessity. The interiors of this game are large and very dark labyrinthian places, and they make great use of the illumination coming from James's flashlight, which was probably the first time I ever saw real-time lighting in this way. The flashlight actually casts real shadows, and I distinctly remember being really impressed at the time. Unfortunately, the controls and the combat are one area where the game stumbles. It's by far better than the first game, but that doesn't mean it's good. The game's controls can feel very clunky at times, and the combat is just uninteresting. It doesn't feel very smooth, and outside of a very few specific moments, no encounters really feel unique. Whoa, please put down your pitchforks and your torches. This really is the only negative thought that I have about the game. I love Silent Hill 2 despite its flaws. Right, so I guess it's about time we talk about what makes this game a true masterpiece. It's the story and how the characters interact within it. We're heading deep into spoiler territory, so if you don't want the story or its twist ruined for you, stop watching now. For the love of God, just go play the game, and then of course please come back and watch this video. Okay, are we all ready for spoilers? Mary didn't die from her illness 3 years ago. James suffocated her with a pillow sometime in the last week. And the game is a journey through James's guilt and his subconscious desire for punishment. And the town of Silent Hill, with its ability to make thoughts and emotions manifest physically, is more than happy to help him. In most games this would be enough to be the crux of the entire story, but Silent Hill 2 goes much deeper. You see, James smothered Mary to put her out of her misery. It was a mercy kill.
No.
He wanted to end her suffering, and she wanted her suffering to end too. His guilt, however, comes more from the emotions and frustrated thoughts he experienced before he killed her. He'd convinced himself that he wanted her to die, that he hated her, where it's actually clear towards the end of the game that he loved her deeply and he was just wishing for an end to both of their suffering. Now, let's have a look at how his guilt manifests and how he's going to punish himself. You may have noticed that while being horrific, the creatures in this game have a very sexual undertone to them. This is based on James's guilt around his sexual frustration and his desires that he felt during his wife's illness, and how he hates himself for fantasizing about other women. As you can see, these creatures never have a face, which alludes to me the fact that James actually felt some guilt towards how he objectified the women around him, specifically the nurses that cared for his dying wife. And this feels very believable. Mary was clearly in no state for intimacy, and James still had the same drives that we all have. And so, with James being a guilty man, who better to punish him than Pyramid Head, an executioner from the town's past as seen in the paintings hanging on the wall of the Silent Hill Historical Society. And being a physical representation of punishment, it's clear that James feels he deserves to die for his crimes. Several times during the course of the game, James has to watch as Pyramid Head kills Maria, forcing him to face his most traumatic memory, forcing him to face the crime that he's guilty of. And after symbolically reaching the deepest recesses of his mind, he's able to finally defeat the two Pyramid Head bosses by forgiving himself, thus removing the need for his punishment. And after the Pyramid Heads fall on their own spears, James is free to face the final part of his psychosis. Maria, his wife's doppelganger, an idealized, more sexual version of his late wife, becoming a twisted representation of Mary in her hospital bed. After defeating this twisted form, it leaves James free to leave the town with Laura, the young girl we met earlier. But who is she and why is she important? Laura was in hospital at the same time as Mary. They became friends, and Mary wanted to adopt her if she made it through her treatment. This obviously wouldn't come to pass, but I see Laura as a light at the end of the tunnel for James, a metaphorical representation of James having a future. And finally, let's get into Angela and Eddie. They're both on a similar journey to James. Angela, unfortunately, was sexually abused by her father and feels guilty for murdering him. And Eddie, a victim of bullying, who shot his tormentor's dog and then shot his tormentor in the knee, ruining his football career. Their stories are heartbreaking, and the one thing I rarely hear anyone talk about is how they face their guilt and how that differs from James's resolution. James learned to forgive himself, whereas Angela allows the guilt to consume her, believing herself to be deserving of punishment. And unfortunately, this is where she gives in to her suicidal tendencies and allows the flames to consume her.
Always like this.
Eddie hides from his guilt, consistently saying he's done nothing wrong, finally convincing himself that his actions were righteous and that his victims deserved it for tormenting him, ending up in complete denial that he's done anything wrong, allowing him to give in to his violent ways without feeling guilt. That's right, in a single video game narrative, Team Silent managed to squeeze all this amazing characterization and storytelling, and this is why this game has stuck with me for over 20 years. It feels like a genuine insight into how people process guilt and loss, with a strong message about facing your issues regardless of how uncomfortable they are. Coming back to this game after many years, I was worried that it wouldn't live up to my rose-tinted view of its brilliance, but I'm more than happy to say that not only does it live up to my original praise, but after seeing more of life and loss since the first time I played it, it might even be deserving more. And although the combat and controls aren't great, I can't give this game any less than 5 physical manifestations of guilt out of 5. I really hope Bloober Team don't f*** up this remake. So here we are at the end of another quest. If you've made it this far through the video, thank you so much for watching. Please give a like and especially please subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll see you for the next one.